Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Wednesday, January 7th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Governor Gavin Newsom is planning to deliver California's State of the State address later this week, and the state of the budget is not looking so strong.
And this year, the Legislative Analyst's Office is projecting an $18 billion deficit.
Coming up, we'll learn more about why the state is facing such a large deficit and what it means for California residents. But first, these headlines. A federal court ordered a Valley Ag employer to pay back wages and civil penalties after a labor investigation. KVPR's Crescencio Rodriguez Delgado reports the case is tied to a highway crash that left 7 farm workers dead 2 years ago in Madera County.
The U.S. Department of Labor said Lion Farms, which is based out of Selma, neglected to transport ag workers in safe vehicles. This is after a crash nearly 2 years ago left 7 men dead. They were heading to a vineyard in Firebaugh when a pickup truck crossed the median and crashed head-on with their van. The driver of that pickup also died. It was one of the deadliest crashes involving farm workers in years. Federal regulators say the farm company violated the Migrant and Seasonal Agricultural Worker Protection Act by failing to ensure the workers were transported safely. Regulators also found the company illegally charged workers a transportation fee. It was ordered to pay $89,000 in penalties, in addition to $39,000 in back wages to at least a dozen employees. For KVPR News, I'm Crescencio Rodriguez Delgado.
More questions are swirling in the criminal case involving former Kern County Supervisor Zach Scrivener, who's facing child abuse charges. His mother, Kathy Scrivener, is now facing allegations that she knew of the abuse and failed to report it to authorities. A prosecutor in the case alleges that Kathy Scrivener told her grandchildren not to speak to the police about the abuse. That prosecutor cited a police report, according to the TV outlet KGET. The state is conducting the investigation. Kathy Scrivener is a member of the Kern High School District School Board. By law, an employee working directly with children must report child abuse. Roughly 1,500 Fresno Unified retirees on Medicare have lost access to community medical centers. That's after the contract between the insurance company Aetna and Community expired at the end of 2025. The Fresno Unified School Board approved Aetna coverage last month to avoid insurance gaps for most retirees. But community medical center facilities are now considered out of network, leaving some with limited options outside of emergencies. Fresno Unified Superintendent Misty Herr says the district is reviewing all options. Republican Congressman Doug LaMalfa has died at age 65. He represented much of northeastern California, including the cities of Redding and Chico. LaMalfa was a rice farmer and had served 7 terms in the U.S. House. President Donald Trump had this reaction to the news.
He was a fantastic person. Man, that was a quick one. I don't know quite yet what happened, but boy, it's a tough one. He was just with us. He was our friend, all of us, every one of us.
The Butte County's Sheriff's Office says the congressman experienced a medical emergency Monday and died during a surgical procedure. LaMalfa's death reduces the GOP's narrow control of the House to 218 seats. Democrats hold 213 seats. A new state law now in effect lets California residents use just one request to tell hundreds of online data brokers to delete their information. Prior to the start of the year, consumers had to contact each company individually. The California Privacy Protection Agency says data brokers can collect information to infer political views, health data, including pregnancy, and family and financial information. California's DROP program is available by visiting privacy.ca.gov.
Support for Central Valley Daily comes from the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Fresno State, providing short courses and activities for everyone 50 and better. Spring semester registration begins January 14th. More info available at fresnostate.edu/OLLI, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, where learning never ends.
And now to our main story. Tomorrow, Governor Gavin Newsom will deliver his State of the State address to Californians, and it comes at a tense time, not just because the state has been locked in lawsuits with the federal government, but because California is facing a multi-billion-dollar deficit. With the governor's proposed budget also due this week, today we're going to break down the state of California's finances. I'm joined by CalMatters political reporter Yue Stella Yue, who starts our conversation by painting a picture of the state's economy and budget as they stand today.
Well, as we start off the year, our stock market is doing great for now. It is partly driven by this excitement about the AI industry. We have a lot of investors even borrowing money to buy high-cost stocks. And because of that, our revenue for the past few months has come in billions of dollars higher than expected. But there are questions about whether it's sustainable that way. So what does that mean for our budget? Generally, higher revenue is good news for our budget. But we also have to remember much of it is constitutionally required to go toward funding education and be deposited into the state's reserves. And a little history about our budget is that for each of the last 3 years, California was projecting a deficit while the revenue was still growing. And this year, the Legislative Analyst's Office, which is the independent, nonpartisan fiscal advisor to the state legislature, is projecting an $18 billion deficit that could grow into an annual $35 billion deficit by fiscal year 2027-2028.
Wow, that is a big deficit. I remember just a few years ago, wasn't California like in the green? Didn't we have more money than we knew what to do with at one point?
Totally. Yeah. In 2022, we actually had a nearly $100 billion surplus. And part of that was the revenue was doing really well, and it was way better than projected, right? So at that time, we were able to fund a lot of the things that the legislators wanted to fund. But then that was followed by a projected $56 billion deficit over the next 2 years. And here I want us to remember that California has this very volatile budget structure. And it is because we are overly reliant on the stock market. We're overly reliant on the personal income tax from the wealthiest, from the high earners. And so what that means is that when the stock market is not doing very well, the state suffers because the revenue is coming in lower than projected. Case in point, at the beginning of 2025, Newsom was projecting a modest surplus of $363 million for fiscal year 2025-2026, because we had $17 billion more in revenue than previously anticipated. But then, a lot of things can happen, right? So then the state had to spend billions of dollars in disaster aid for the January wildfires in LA. And all the LA residents got to delay their tax filings because of the disaster. So we had a significant chunk of our revenue that wasn't coming in until later in the year. So it made it very hard to predict what the future held for us, right? We also saw in the same year the cost of Medi-Cal rising to $6 billion more than previously projected. And at the same time, the state was tied in lawsuits with the Trump administration over federal funding that he was withholding from the state. Some we got back, some we have yet to receive. So with all that happened by May 2025, we were looking at a $12 billion deficit instead of the modest surplus that Newsom had projected at the beginning of last year.
Yeah, it really shows how unexpected events can change things. So for 2026, what specifically are some of the biggest budgetary challenges that Governor Newsom and the state legislature are facing?
Well, they must figure out a way to balance the books because they have to. The Constitution requires them to. And they have many options. Some of them are temporary fixes. Some of them are longer term. And so far, they've been resorting to temporary solutions for the past years, like delaying some spending until the next fiscal year, making one-time cuts, drawing from the state's reserves, and borrowing money from other internal state funds, and things like that.
Okay.
But the legislative analyst's office warned that these temporary fixes won't fix a structural deficit like this that has lasted several years in a row. So in longer term, the money has to come from somewhere, right? Either through more revenue, which perhaps means raising taxes, or longer term spending cuts.
That makes me think, obviously, raising taxes would impact Californians and residents who live here. Why should people care about the health of the state's budget? How does it impact them?
So how much the state has to spend can determine lots of aspects of your life. Case in point, Medi-Cal, right? That is the state's most expensive program. It is the state's insurance program for low-income residents. And in California, we have a lot of them. And so last year, because of the state's budget pressure, the state already had to make some cuts or roll back some of the services in Medi-Cal. And what we saw was, and the legislators tried very hard not to directly cut, core services. But what they did was, they froze new enrollment for Medi-Cal coverage for undocumented people who are 19 and older. And they also required that some undocumented immigrants would start paying a $30 monthly premium. And that's not effective until 2027. So the state still has time to figure it out right before. But that is an area where people can be affected when the state does not have money. And this year, because of the larger deficit that is currently being projected, there are some people who are concerned that Medi-Cal could still be on the chopping block because it is a very attractive target. And the federal changes to Medi-Cal have made it so that the state has to spend more money in the next few years just to maintain the same services to the same number of people. And at the same time, it is a big question mark as to whether the state can even claw back some of the federal funds, right? So
Sure.
our future is still uncertain in that regard. And that is why I think just in the healthcare realm, there is so much at stake that is tied to the state budget.
Has Governor Newsom or members of the state legislature officially announced any specific plan yet for 2026 with how they plan to deal with the deficit?
Well, we will see what the governor proposes this Friday. He's scheduled to talk about some of his ambition for this year and his legacy and perhaps his budget preview this Thursday during his State of the State address. But his official budget proposal is not coming until this Friday. Because of the higher revenue, his own projection might be rosier than the $18 billion deficit that the legislative analyst's office projected way back in November. But either way, lots of things can change between January and May. And May is when the governor has to revise his budget proposal once again based on new data. So we shall see.
Yue Stella Yue, politics reporter with our news partner, CalMatters. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
And that is today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
How does AI even work? Where does creativity come from? What's the secret to living longer? TED Radio Hour explores the biggest questions with some of the world's greatest thinkers. They will surprise, challenge, and even change you. Listen to NPR's TED Radio Hour wherever you get your podcasts.